All right, a major election reform bill was signed into law by Georgia Governor Brian Kemp on Thursday. And it was criticized the next day by the president, as he said it was an atrocity. Well, the left and the media, meanwhile, continue to falsely decry the legislation as racist, despicable, voter suppression, an attack on our democracy. You know, quite frankly, it makes me wonder if they've even read the bill. To make my point, here is a little bit more of what President Biden had to say about the bill.
It's an atrocity. The idea, if you want any indication that it has nothing to do with fairness, nothing to do with decency, they pass a law saying you can't provide water for people standing in line while they're waiting to vote. You don't need anything else to know that this is nothing but punitive, designed to keep people from voting.
Well, joining us now is Georgia Governor Brian Kemp. Governor, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Tony. Good to be with you.
So, Governor, let me ask you this question. Does this deny water to those who are standing in line to vote?
Oh, man, I tell you, I almost feel sorry for the president that he was so misinformed, obviously, by his handlers, not knowing what the bill says. Of course, people can be handed water or a water station could be provided by the election poll workers at the precinct or early voting location. But no, we're not going to allow him or me or any other candidate or third-party groups to hand out favors to voters while they're standing in line. And that's within 150 feet of the polling location. If it's outside of that, you know, it's fair game for people to put up signs and campaign to hand out pamphlets and other things, but we just don't want voters to be bothered or intimidated while they're in line. So that's just factually not correct, and I'm not sure where he got that from. I personally think they're trying to distract, speaking of water, of the dam busting on our southern border and people flooding into the country.
That, I think, would be accurate. But now that we've established what the bill does not do, let's talk, Governor, about what the bill actually does do. And I know this is in response to what happened in November and concerns about the November election. So let's talk about what this bill does do.
Yeah, really, it's very simple. It makes it easy to vote and hard to cheat. And you know, I've always pushed for secure, accessible, fair elections in our state. And this bill simply replaces an antiquated, arbitrary signature match with the voter ID, which is free in Georgia for absentee ballots by mail. It secures ballot drop boxes around the clock. It requires our poll workers to continue tabulating ballots until all the votes are counted. And then the really good thing, which is even more surprising that the president would weigh in about how bad the bill is, it expands voting access, especially on the weekends during our early voting process, where his own state of Delaware is not near as generous as the state of Georgia is when it comes to early voting opportunities and access.
So, Governor, I mean, a lot of criticism kind of going into Georgia about the elections in Georgia. Now, you were formerly the Secretary of State, so you had responsibilities over elections. Now, this past election in November, because of the coronavirus and a lot of actions that were taken, sometimes unilaterally in some states, this exposed some weaknesses in our system. And that is why we've seen 43 states, including your own, introduce somewhere upwards of 250 different pieces of legislation to address these issues.
Yeah, you know, one of the pieces that's in this bill was actually a Democrat's idea dealing with, you know, when you can request absentee ballot if you're going to vote by mail and when you got to mail that back. You know, there's been a lot of warnings from the Postal Service that you need to allow for 2 weeks to get your vote back in. So that was addressed in the legislation with an 11-day period prior to the election. You got to get your ballot mailed before that. That's ensuring that voter's ballot's going to be received and be counted and not be left uncounted because it gets to the or to the elections officials late. That was a Democratic idea. So, you know, it's really dealing with a lot of the structural, mechanical things that we had problems with. Voters not being, or groups that were monitoring the returns not being able to get close enough to that process, dealing with that. Long lines at polling locations. I mean, the whole thing with the water issue, Tony, my question is, Why are people standing in line long enough to have water and food? They shouldn't have to do that. This bill addresses how many voting machines and how much equipment you should have at each precinct based on the number of voters that are going to be coming through there. And if long lines develop, it makes the counties adapt to that and put measures in that will speed the process up. Of course, you're not hearing that mentioned by any on the left. And then really the voter ID requirement on absentee ballot by mail, by taking away the signature match process, which is arbitrary in many cases. In the talks that I've had with county elected officials, and I've worked with a lot of them that I still know, I did that for 9 years, they feel like this will make the process better for them. It'll make it more efficient, and it'll speed it up, which will allow us to get the results out quicker.
So Governor, there's nothing in the description that you've given me of the bill, of what it actually does, that to me sounds racist, despicable, a targeted effort to suppress voters, or an attack on a democracy. It actually sounds like the opposite of that.
Well, it absolutely is, and that's what's so frustrating about the mainstream media, and I really appreciate you helping us just simply getting the truth out. And that's what I've told people. Don't believe the rhetoric. Don't believe the, Jim Crow 2.0. It's simply not true, and people are lying to you, and they're purposely misinforming you. Lots of people that are running these third-party groups are making a lot of money by doing this. The playbook for this, Tony, was devised, long before anybody even knew what was going to be in the final bill. When you think about the domain name being secured, Jim Crow 2.0, weeks or perhaps even over a month ago, before anybody even knew what the final version was going to look like. And I think, at the end of the day, the truth is on our side here. It's fixing a lot of broken mechanics here. It's addressing problems that people had concerns about, but it's also providing more access, especially on the weekends for the early voting period.
So, Governor Kemp, what you were just talking about, that there are those that are saying things that are not true about it. They are not focusing on what the bill actually does. Is there a bigger agenda here? When you look at the fact that you're not alone, 42 other states have taken actions to correct problems that surfaced during this last election. Of course, the Democrats moving hard with H.R. 1 here in Washington to push through basically a measure that would solidify some of the abnormalities that took place in this last election. Is there a bigger agenda here?
Well, you got to assume that it is, Tony. I mean, I can't imagine that the President of the United States would weigh in on a bill like this that is adding access and simply requiring a voter ID for absentee ballot by mail, which most Georgians and most Americans support. We've been using voter ID in Georgia since the mid-2000s, and minority participation has actually increased every year since then. We had huge turnout, obviously, when I won in 2018 of the African-American vote. And we saw with Latino and Asian as well. And I think it is. It's for them to drive that.
Oh, I think we lost the governor. Let's see. You're fading in and out on us, Governor.
I'm sorry about that. But I do think it's just part of the agenda to do the unconstitutional power grab and push through H.R. 1, which would be a disaster and nationalize elections in our country, which, as you know, our founders very cautiously worked against early on by allowing states to run elections to prevent foreign interference. Right,
absolutely. One final question for you, Governor. This is not new to Georgia. You've had others threatening boycott over religious freedom protections and other matters. Now you have the left actually calling for boycotts because you're protecting the integrity of your election systems. What do you say to them?
Well, it's really sad that people will do this to great Georgia businesses and corporations and the hard-working Georgians that are employed there. When we're in the middle of a worldwide pandemic and many of these businesses have been struggling. Thankfully, we've been working with our business community. They know what's in the bill. I believe that they're being unfairly targeted, and I hope that at the end of the day it ends up punishing those that are pushing this narrative. It's ridiculous.
I would agree with you on that, Governor. Governor, thanks so much for joining us, and I'm glad you're leading the way on this election reform. I hope the other states follow your lead.
Thanks for having me on, Tony. God bless and happy Easter.